It certainly is a pleasure to be back on the Cabrini College campus as the 27th academic year begins. It's really a coming home for me, having served as Cabrini's president for 10 years, 1972 to 1982. But today is also a special privilege because I have with me two women who really helped to form part of the living history of this institution. The foundress of the college, Mother Ursula Infante, who opened its doors in 1957 and served as president to 1967. And with us is Sister Salesia LeDieu, who was the director of admissions back in the late 60s and chairperson of the Fine Arts Department when it was in its beginning stages. I'd like to spend this time speaking to Mother Ursula and Sister Salesia and sharing with everyone who will watch this videotape recollections of Cabrini College. Sister Ursula, would you like to tell us in your own words how Cabrini College came to be?
Well, in the early 50s, Mother Antoinette de la Casa, then the Superior General of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, expressed the desire of founding a college for our sisters because at that time they were attending secular universities. She thought of Dobbs Ferry as a possible site, but I discouraged that idea because the campus wasn't large enough. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, the orphanage at, I think it was at 54th Street, had reached its limits and was not adequate for the children. So the sisters there were looking for a larger place. Mr. Leo McManus, a friend of Sister Elizabeth, told her that there was an estate for sale at Radnor, Pennsylvania. So the sisters went there, they inspected the place, they liked it, and they negotiated for its purchase. Later on, I visited the Dorrans estate. As I walked through that majestic iron gate and drove through the tree-lined road to the mansion, the thought struck me forcibly that this was the place that Mother Antoinette would like for a college. So I wrote to her, I sent her photographs of the place, I even went to Milan to visit her. But she was so ill that no business could be transacted. After her death, Mother Valentina Colombo was elected as Superior General of the Institute. And one of the first things she did when she came to the United States in 1955 was to call me up and say, "Come to Radnor, see if we can start a college." And that was the conception of Cabrini College.
What a beautiful memory to have, Mother. As you were speaking, just some of the names you mentioned, Leo McManus. I know I've heard that when he was a young boy, he met Mother Cabrini. Mother Cabrini had been befriended by his father, and Mr. McManus went on to become a trustee of Cabrini College, and his children's children attended Cabrini College as students. You mentioned two very famous women in the religious order of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, Mother Antoinette de la Casa and Mother Valentina Colombo, and they were both successors to St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. I'd like to just step aside for a minute before we go on speaking about Cabrini College and just reflect with you personally for a moment, because if I'm not mistaken, in your young years, you knew Mother Francis Xavier Cabrini, who was then to become Saint Francis Xavier Cabrini, the first
Yes.
American saint.
I was first introduced to Mother Cabrini At the age of 14, I went with other members of the Sodality of the Children of Mary and Sacred Hearts Church to visit Mother. And at that time, I asked her if she would accept me as a daughter. And she said I would have to wait till I was 18. And at that time, when I was 18, I went to Sacred Heart Villa on Fort Washington Avenue, and there she was at the gate, ready to receive me. And she put on me the habit of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart. And I made my first retreat as a religious with Mother Cabrini.
What a marvelous, marvelous memory. Sister Salesia, if I'm not mistaken, you did not enter the community while Mother Cabrini was still alive, but came to the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart very soon after her death, when the spirit, which had been so alive during her time, still reigned among the sisters. Would you just tell us a little bit about your place of origin and how you came to know the Missionary Sisters?
Well, I think that it's a beautiful story, but it's a very simple story. I met our sisters through other young women who were making retreats. And I remember waiting for the sister to whom I wished to speak. It was Mother Rose O'Hara. I just wanted to talk with her, consult with her about my vocation. And she left me in the parlor for a few moments because she was called out.
This was in New Orleans.
That was in New Orleans. And while I was waiting, I leafed through a book, and it was strange because it was the funeral eulogies of Saint Cabrini. And yet that gave me such a beautiful light. I met Mother Cabrini in the pages of that book for the first time. And when Sister came back, I suppose after something like a 20-minute pause, I told her I wanted to enter here. And of course that nearly floored her, but she was able to take it. And so that was the beginning. Before that, I had never heard of Mother Cabrini. And within a week, I was one of her daughters. I had entered on the next Sunday. That was, so I entered at a time, I entered in 1922. And that was the time, Mother having died just in 1917. That was the time when her memory was fresh. And of course, we always spoke of La Madre. She was the mother. And everything all around, we had the little posters of her sayings and so forth. That was really the Cabrini spirit.
Well, I certainly hope that students who will watch this tape will come to love their own college a little bit better and its name, Cabrini, having heard you two valiant women talk about your personal experiences with Mother Cabrini and with the early sisters who knew St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, from which this institution of higher education takes its name and takes its inspiration. Let's get back a little bit now to how it all began. Mother Ursula talked about coming up the tree-lined road and the beautiful mansion. What about your recollections of the first classes, the original faculty, the facilities? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, at the time, the mansion was being occupied by the sisters and the orphans. And the first item on the agenda was to find a place for these orphans so that the mansion could be used for college purposes. On the campus, the only other large building besides the mansion was the stables. So that had to be renovated, reconstructed to make it a fit habitation for the orphans. That was quickly attended to, and the orphans moved into what is now Grace Hall. Now in the mansion, the foyer, the chapel, the library, the dining room, the smoker needed no structural alterations, merely furnishings. But the master bedroom was converted into a lecture hall. The guest rooms around the balcony were transformed into classrooms. And the squash court of the Dorrance estate became a very well-equipped chemistry laboratory.
I think something the students would be very interested to hear about would be the other large building that existed on campus besides the mansion. What was that originally?
The other large building was what we call the stable, and I have seen pictures of it, and I think that during the time of the Dorrances there were 17 horses housed there.
You know we have the men's dormitory now in one wing of the...
And much to my surprise.
Those early years must have been both exciting and challenging, and years too of some concern. Here was a new venture beginning really from scratch. Can you tell us about some of the first classes, the first faculties, names that might be coming to your mind in reverie as you think back upon?
Well, the faculty that had been recruited during the time of our preparing the college were fully qualified. They were experienced and enthusiastic about assisting in the founding process of the college. Most eager to go on with that work was Dr. Rose Green. She was professor of English and later became chairman of the department. And it was her expertise that led many of the girls to excel in literary performance. Then there was Dr. Lange-Bartel of European descent, and she made the study of French and Italian a very charming chore, so much so that some of the students went abroad for a year to continue their study of the language. Miss Geraldine Ferrari taught chemistry, and Miss Cynthia Schwandler taught biology. The Reverend Louis Georgie was instructor in theology and philosophy, and he left his mark on his students. At the very beginning also was Mr. Vito DiVincenzo,
Who is still here at Cabrini College.
Yeah, he taught Spanish at that time. And these are a few of the names that stand out in my mind.
As you were speaking, I can remember so much of what you're saying. I left the novitiate in September 1957, and my first mission was teaching in a little school not too far from Radnor in Conshohocken, Pennsylvania. And we sisters who were in the area did attend Saturday classes at that time. And how well I remember the lecture hall that you described and the classrooms off the balcony. And I also remember some summers when you would decide that maybe this classroom in the mansion should be moved over to Grace Hall because the orphans had vacated and moved to a new house down in Philadelphia. And we sister students, after completing our summer courses, would pack up the classroom and move it across the campus for you. But they were days of a lot of hard work. You mentioned the library, how well I remember that. The library was in back of what was then the chapel. The chapel is today both the development, public relations, and alumni office, and the library. And I think if students or faculty go in, they'll see some of the beautiful shelving still in existence, was in what is now the business office. One summer, it must have been the early 60s, with a straight face, you said to me and to Joan Hart, a friend, Mother Xavier, that you'd like us to do a favor for you after summer classes. You asked us to move the library. That time, I believe the collection numbered about 10,000 volumes. So we got a little push cart from one of the local supermarkets, and we began our chore, and we moved the library from the mansion over to the ground level of Sacred Heart Hall. And finally, I think about the last 2 or 3 days, someone got the bright idea of using the pickup truck. So while I was in a quite different capacity from you at the time, I do share with you and remember so many of those beautiful memories. Sister Salesia, there's a woman who you have spent some time with, various graduations, a very beautiful woman in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Anna Bruckman. Could you just tell us a little bit about Anna? Because I think Mother Ursula will tell us something very exciting about what Anna has meant to Cabrini College.
Well, my contacts with Miss Bruckman, Miss Anna Bruckman, were simple personal contacts. So often she came to events, and everybody was so busy that I was asked to stay with her, keep her company. And I got to know her as a person, and I got to appreciate the simple beauty of her character, the very gentleness, the kindness, the thoughtfulness, and the quiet suffering, because in so many ways she was suffering physically and through family problems and so forth. And so I got to feel a real personal affection for a person that I think is a very noble type of Christian womanhood, in her great simplicity and her humility and her thoughtfulness for others, while she is in a position that she could be concentrating on herself, instead her kindness goes out to others. So for me, she's a very precious friend.
You said her kindness goes out to others. Her kindness and that of her mother really went out to Cabrini College. And we have on the campus the beautiful Bruckman Memorial Chapel. Mother Ursula, you had a hand in that. How did that come about?
Well, one day in 1960, I was talking with attorney James Lanchey about our urgent need for a chapel. He told me he had a client who was desirous of building a chapel in a cemetery in memory of her beloved dead. So I told him, please introduce me to Mrs. Bruckman. So she came to the college, and in talking to her, I made her see how necessary a chapel was for our students and how it would be used daily for their spiritual benefit. And so she agreed with me on that point and said she would build a chapel on the college grounds, but we would have to wait until she died. Well, Cabrini College couldn't wait for an uncertain time. So I called the architect, Mr. William Foley, to make a large color drawing of a chapel he would build for our school. He did. And when Mrs. Bruckman and her daughter Ann came, I showed them the drawing. We examined it. And Mrs. Bruckman even made suggestions about changing the number of steps to the entrance to the chapel. But we still had to wait until she died. Then, further talking, I said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had the chapel now and you could attend the dedication by the cardinal? She liked that idea. And so she gave permission, and St. Joseph's Chapel, or the Bruckman Memorial Chapel, came into being.
That is very beautiful, and the chapel has continued through the years to be a source of inspiration to the students, to the faculty, and to visitors to the campus. And it is truly a memorial to the goodness and greatness of the Bruckman family. But I think a little part of that story was left out. Mr. Lanchey always adds another little bit about it, how he came with his daughter, Lois, and you indicated that there were no more spaces left on campus, so there were even dormitory problems back in those early days. But you said, Mr. Lanchey, you get me someone to build a chapel and I'll take your daughter. And that's how Mr. Lanchey got you, right, Mother?
I think so.
Okay, okay. As we progress a little bit now through those early years with happiness and tinged with some sadness as people who knew and loved the college passed on, concern about the growth of the college, always financial concerns. A wonderful time came very early for a young college, and that was full accreditation by the Middle States Association of Colleges and Universities back in 1965. What was it like getting ready for that?
Well, by 1963, we had a peak enrollment of 357 students and a faculty of 37, And our academic offerings were majors in English, history, mathematics, chemistry, biology, psychology. And so we thought we were ready to apply for accreditation. We did. And we spent a year in self-evaluation, a year spent in compiling reports, visitations from Harrisburg, and so on. Finally, a team of 8 came, which included Sister Hildegard Marie, the president of St. Elizabeth's College, Dr. David Mullen from this Department of Public Instruction in Harrisburg, and Sister Cora Marie from Immaculata College, the president of Marymount College, and representatives from Vassar College and West Maryland College, etc. And they stayed for 3 days. They interviewed individually both students and faculty. They visited all the departments. And they recognized the seriousness of our purpose and the energy which characterized our foundation. When they left, they were impressed also with the devotion of the faculty to the college and the strong loyalty of the students. And on June 25th, 1965, Feast of the Sacred Heart, we received our full accreditation.
That was certainly an achievement.
Yeah.
And I think that among all the names that you've mentioned, you forgot to add the person who was responsible for all this. That was yourself, Mother Ursula, who with a dynamism and a drive very similar, I would imagine, to that of St. Francis Cabrini. You set your sights on what you wanted to get done, and sure enough, you got it done. You mentioned also dedication of faculty and students. That same Cabrini spirit which you bequeathed to the college still is in effect very much here at Cabrini, and in the Middle States accreditation in 1975, it was again noticed and highlighted as a strong point. Sister Salesia, when did you join Cabrini College as part of the administration and then go on to be a faculty member?
Well, I came to the college in the fall of 1969, and I was asked to head the Department of Admissions. And then after 2 years in the admissions department, I in fact, while I was part of the admissions, I was teaching art. And then after 2 years, I became I took over the chairmanship in 3 years, but after 2 years, I was part of the faculty of the art department.
Now, you know, today admissions has quite an extensive layout, and I know when I was president, there was always a need for another room, and a need for a reception room, and a need for a financial aid office. How big was your suite of rooms when you began as director of admissions?
Well, it was, for that matter, it seemed to be an advance already, because the admissions department had been handled by the registrar. Sister Amadea had both. So they thought it was wonderful that now we were separate. Now we had a room of our own. But it was really what you might call a cubbyhole. It's now a little reception room. And I had a big desk in that room. And then another corner was another smaller desk for the lady, Mrs. Oristaglio, who was supposed to be my assistant. And then after that, when a third person came, Sister Immaculate, she had a tiny desk in the other corner. So if I had to interview somebody, I had to go out into the foyer. And we'd sit down in a very friendly fashion. I think it worked well. And we'd have our little talk together because we wouldn't fit into the office itself.
You know, just looking at the college today and its facilities, I thought we might spend a few moments just sharing impressions of Cabrini College, 1983, where it's been, where it is, and where it may be going. Mother Ursula?
What I think is its greatest asset at the present time is the Widener Center. When I look at that lecture hall, when I see all the communications rooms and all its facilities, I think that Cabrini has reached its height.
Sister Salesia?
Well, I would say, perhaps it's out of order, but I would say one thing yet is lacking. We need an art. We need a building for fine arts.
Oh, I think Mrs. Bethany will be delighted to hear you add that. One,
Until we have that, I think we're incomplete.
as we talk about the Widener Center that we're sitting in right now to tape this program, I'd like to let posterity know that the beautiful stained glass window, which is at the entrance, was designed by Sister Salesia, who is beside me, and the building was made possible through the generosity of the George D. Widener Trust, and the person who was instrumental in getting those funds for the building was the chairman of the board of the college, Mrs. Fitz-Eugene Dixon. She and her husband, Fitz Dixon, really went out of their way to make this a splendid building for the college. I think, Sister Salesia, I would chime in with you in that there are other things still needed. A science building, perhaps, in the future, a theater, separate theater. I understand that very soon a new dormitory may be built. As the years go on, certain other new needs will also crop up. I thought as we try to pull things together now and perhaps head toward the conclusion of this little session, we could just stop for a moment and think. I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to speak twice. First of all, to perhaps share with the viewers what for you might have been the happiest moment or something, the most meaningful moment while you were at Cabrini College, and then also to add anything that you might have been thinking about or jotted down in notes before we got together that we haven't touched on. Mother Ursula?
For me, the greatest moment, because it meant a lot for our students, was the moment when we received our accreditation, that our girls could go forth to other universities and be recognized as fully accredited. And the second to that was the blessing or the dedication of the Bruckman Memorial Chapel, which was graced by Archbishop Kroll.
Is there anything that you have jotted down? I know those very well prepared notes, the research you must have done, that I noticed you pushed over 2 or 3 pages. Is there something that we haven't touched on that you think would be of interest and significance to those who want to learn more about Cabrini College? Why don't you just take a moment looking through those as I ask Sister Salesia to share with me and with you and with our viewers a meaningful moment in her memories of Cabrini College.
Well, I don't think I could pick out any one, but I think one thing that's relatively important would be the time when we were working in preparation for the visitation from the college, what would you call it, for our probation to be renewed.
For Middle States
Middle
reaccreditation.
States again. And I was on the committee for the preparation of the philosophy, the statement of our philosophy. And it did my heart good to see all of these faculty members, fellow members of this committee, working on that statement of a Cabrini philosophy for the college, because I felt that was the biggest contribution we could make, injecting of our philosophy into this educational endeavor.
As I look back myself, it's very hard to single out any one incident. Like Mother Ursula, I do remember the dedication of a building, and it was this very building, the Widener Center. Cardinal Kroll was here, and Mr. and Mrs. Dixon, so many friends of the college, our faculty members and students, and I knew it was something that the students had needed for so many years and did not think that it would be possible to achieve before I left the college. And so for me, the dedication of the Widener Center was a particularly moving moment. Mother Ursula, have you had time to do a little prepping there and bring us up to date?
Well, this may seem to be out of place, but before we could even use the word college, we had to have the recognition of the state. So this entailed many trips to Harrisburg, filling out of forms, conferences with state officials, their visitations of the campus, and also our testifying in court as to purpose, curriculum, finances, all of which was engineered by our capable lawyer, Mrs. Yanni Romica of Rosemont, Pennsylvania. And it was through her ability that we received the charter of the state in March of 1957. When we opened the college, we had our charter, and we could use the word Cabrini College.
How wonderful, Mother.
Yes.
Sister Salesia, is there anything you think that you'd like to bring forward that we may have forgotten in our discussions? No? As I was listening to you and talking a few moments ago about a memorable moment, I think memorable people come very much to mind. I think of happiness with so many faculty members who are still here from the early days. I think too of sadness, the death of a very young philosophy professor, Larry Sedler, the beginning of the fall term, just a few years into my tenure. I think of Jane Swartz Benjamin, who was the dynamic head of the history department, and her very unanticipated demise. I think of students who have gone already to their heavenly reward. And I think that while buildings are important and curriculum and state approbations, it has been the people that has made Cabrini College. The men and women, and certainly I think one thing we did not go into is when Cabrini College became coeducational. I believe officially it was on the books in 70 or 71, and men first began to reside on campus about 1974, and now they are a very important part of the college. But I think people, it's not the buildings, it's the people. And primary among those people, we're so honored to have with us the woman who was the foundress of this college, in yourself, Mother Ursula, and another woman who has been an active part of the college and a teacher of many of the sisters before they came to the college back at Cabrini High School, Sister Salesia. I am very glad to have been here at Cabrini College for 12 years, 2 as dean and 10 as president, and beyond that, a few years in my early religious life when I was taking classes and teaching nearby. I think we all look to the future with a lot of confidence and look back upon some splendid memories. So Mother Ursula, I thank you so much for sharing yourself with us. And Sister Salesia, I thank you too for being with us today. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.